Hi, George. Welcome. A little bit early, but we can start. I'm sure everyone else will be on in just a minute. I've lost my other screen. Oh, there we go. Let me see if I can give you a... Would it be okay if I give you an opportunity to talk, George? If you let me know in the chat. Hi, George. You should be able to unmute now.
Yeah, I did. So
excellent. Welcome. Nice to meet you.
Same here. We had a lot of exchanges.
Yeah, I know. It's first time we're actually talking. It's excellent to hear your voice. So how's the weather doing there? It's early in the morning or late at night there?
No, it's actually in the afternoon. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, okay. So not a bad time.
I guess 6 hours.
Yes.
Ahead of us.
Yeah, it's absolutely pitch black here and freezing cold, but everything else is fine. I'm gonna start sharing the screen and the startup, and then Jill's also going to join, and she'll be talking with us, and we can answer the questions that come through. Okay,
that'll be fine.
Okay, so welcome everyone to Process Safety with Louise. We've got two guests today. The first one is George. You will have just heard him if you joined early, and then also we've got Jill Butler who's joining as well today. So just a recap of what Process Safety with Louise is. This session is being streamed live to YouTube and is available for playback on the YouTube channel. So just be mindful and respectful of what you say, because obviously other people will be able to watch it afterwards. What is Process Safety with Louise? It's a place to get industry expert advice and ask questions on any topic. Really, we've changed it now to any topic, any month. It's the first Wednesday of each month, and it's available for catch up on YouTube. And it's a place also for you guys to bring your best practices and share them with us. And every time I do one of these sessions, I learn something new. So I don't have all the answers either. So that's why we're all here, is just to share and learn. And I really started this because I know that there's a lot of countries where people don't feel safe to ask questions, and also maybe don't have that support network. If you work in a smaller company, you might not know other process safety engineers. So this is just a place where you can start to ask those questions and get some answers. Just creating a network really for all of us to start. So we're starting 8 o'clock UK time. I'm going to have about 10 minutes for introduction, and I'm going to do a little safety moment, and then we will open the floor for questions. If you have any questions before we open the floor for questions, please type them in, and as soon as we've started, we will answer those. I also, if you're on the email circulation, you'll see that there was an email tonight to remind you about the webinar, and there's a few different topics on there which we can maybe talk about if you want. Okay, so as I'm sure most of you know, my name's Louise Whiting, and I host these sessions. I'm a process safety engineer with more than 11 years operational experience, and I've been running my own company now for just over 2 years now. So woohoo, it's still going. And I help a lot of companies with process safety advice, mainly in the form of workshop facilitation, but I really enjoy that. It's a time to get people together, understand what the problem is in detail, and then get to the solution together. George, do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Yes. Good evening, everybody, and good afternoon, depending where you're at. My name is George Miskevich. I basically have been involved with what we call now process safety management for about 52 years. It began when I joined DuPont in 1969. And at that point, DuPont was already in its initial stages of journey of introducing what we call now process safety management due to an incident that happened in 1965 in one of our sites, where the company recognized that traditional safety, occupational health and safety, really could not handle process safety type of catastrophic events. So I retired in 2006, do a little bit of consulting, but I have a great passion for this topic because I have seen the aftermath of what an event can do to an individual. And also, I like to compliment Louise for her leadership in this effort and all the work that she's been doing around the world to help each one of us to become a little bit more competent and have a little bit more expertise to help organizations to prevent these tragic events from taking place. So thank you, Louise.
And thank you as well, George. Every time you share something, it's something I haven't seen on the news, and so it's really good to keep up to date with the incidents. And also your engagement on the chats are really insightful. It demonstrates your experience and obviously passion for the subject, so thank you. And I was just having a chat with someone this morning about DuPont and their leadership in process safety management, especially early on. So thank you for sharing that. I know in the UK that leadership sort of came from ICI, and in America a lot of that came from DuPont. I'm going to share a short video, and I'm hoping that you'll all be able to hear the screen, the audio. I'm sharing this because in the Northern Hemisphere where we're coming up to winter now, and there are some things that we need to be doing as part of our winterization. So it's just 5 minutes. It'll give us a chance to be able to let everybody else join. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat, and then George and I, and when Jill joins, we will start answering your questions, okay? So let me just see. There we go. You can hear it?
Yes.
Excellent.
Winter is coming. As temperatures begin to drop, it's important for chemical and process facilities to be prepared for the unique safety challenges posed by cold weather. The Chemical Safety Board has conducted several investigations where ineffective winterization practices and programs contributed to a major chemical incident.
I'm CSB investigator Dan Tolima. We investigated the November 2014 chemical release at the DuPont facility in La Porte, Texas, outside of Houston. Our investigation found that days prior to the incident, water had mixed with liquid methyl mercaptan in piping. Due to cold weather in the Houston area, this mixture formed a solid material called a hydrate, which blocked the piping.
Operations personnel in one area of the plant attempted to clear the blockage. And later, in a separate area of the plant, 2 workers opened valves in response to what they believed was a routine, unrelated pressure problem. But the CSB discovered that the high pressure in that other piping was due to the fact that liquid methyl mercaptan was once again flowing through the original, now unblocked pipes. Nearly 24,000 pounds of deadly methyl mercaptan escaped through the open valves in a poorly ventilated manufacturing building.
The 2 workers were killed when they were overcome by the toxic vapor. One of those workers made a distress call, and 2 additional workers died responding to that call.
The CSB found that lack of winterization procedures also contributed to a massive fire that took place in 2007 at the Valero refinery near Sunray in the Texas Panhandle. The fire occurred in a unit that used large amounts of high-pressure liquid propane. Years earlier, the unit had been reconfigured, creating a dead leg, or a section of piping without any flow of liquid. Dead legs are particularly vulnerable to the hazards of freezing, and the dead leg at Valero was blocked on one side by a leaky valve.
Over time, small amounts of water, which were contained in the liquid propane, sank past the leaking valve and accumulated in the piping below. On February 15, the temperature fell to 6 degrees Fahrenheit. The water froze, expanded, and cracked the pipe. The following day, as the weather warmed, the ice melted and propane began jetting from the broken pipe and ignited. The fire seriously burned 3 people, shut down the refinery for 2 months, and contributed to gasoline shortages hundreds of miles away.
These 2 serious accidents illustrate the importance of establishing effective winterization programs at refineries, chemical plants, and other facilities that handle hazardous materials. The CSB has established key winterization safety lessons that facilities should follow. Facilities should effectively identify and address the risk of freeze-related hazards to piping and process equipment through process hazard analyses, management of change evaluations, pre-startup safety reviews, and operating procedures. Create and implement a winterization checklist to ensure that their plant and process systems are ready for cold weather. Establish a formal written freeze protection program. Survey piping systems for dead legs and ensure they are properly isolated, removed, or winterized. And systematically review process units, including infrequently used piping and equipment, to identify and mitigate freezing hazards.
Implementing these important lessons will protect process equipment from cold temperatures, and as a result, prevent serious incidents like the ones at DuPont and Valero. For more information about preparing equipment and instrumentation for cold weather operations, please visit our website at csb.gov. Thank you for watching the CSB Safety Message.
Right. I hope you all got to see that and hear the message. It's an excellent video done by the CSB, and every time I watch, I remember something else. George, what's your experience on winterization, and what good practices have you seen over there in the States?
Well, the key aspect is you need to be anxious. I mean, you need to be take a proactive attitude. For example, one of the units in my experience that I dealt with, I managed an anhydrous ammonia plant operation in West Virginia, where basically winter starts could be as early as November, and it could last through as late as April, depending on the given year. And like everything else in life, we are always very challenged by a lot of other business-related issues that need to be addressed. So what we did have some issues with winterization, where some of our piping ended up freezing because we temporarily lost steam that we use in steam tracing. And so that, fortunately for us, we didn't have the catastrophic consequences that were mentioned in the video that our sister site in LaPorte, Texas suffered, I believe it was in 2014. But you've got to be proactive. It's got to be a core value. What I mean by a core value is the way we run our plants, it has to be done in a safe manner. And it's people use priorities, but priorities change. But if you assume that's going to be something that you're going to do regardless of anything else that needs to be done, and of course we learned the hard way. As I said, we had some some stoppages that resulted from this freeze-ups, which ended up costing us money. And the key learning from those events was you've got to do it early. Keep track of the weather. Don't assume that the winter is going to be late. And as you see, other industries have suffered likewise. I know this past winter down in Texas, due to the weather situation and the significant electrical outages that took place, there were other experiences that were of a negative nature. I don't recall any very serious events that happened, but again, depending on the given situation you're in, you got to be sure, number one, that the supply, whether it's electricity or whether it's steam that you're using, is very reliable. And secondly, the other issue that becomes is sometimes when you're doing work and you have to change pipes or whatever during the summer, during the shutdown, and you got to ensure that the insulation and all of these pipes that need to be covered properly, and that piece is also done, because without it, especially in West Virginia, we had some winds that would come through, and the wind chill effect would really accelerate the possibility of having a freeze up taking place. So
yeah, that's a really good point. It's very easy to get through the turnaround and breathe a big sigh of relief because everything's reconnected and everything, but some of those tasks like removing scaffolding, putting back insulation, they're done afterwards, and the focus is then gone from that urgent need to start back up. You can very easily land up in a situation where you've left things exposed. And another couple of things that I've seen offshore in the UK is having to put snow guards up on air intakes for turbines. So when the snow started quite a lot, we would get a lot of snow inside the air intakes, and that would cause trips on the generators. So we had to put some snow guards, which was just scaffolding to stop too much snow going into the air intakes. And a lot of additional insulation or sometimes wind guards. So in the North Sea, on exposed platforms, it can be really windy, and there are some parts of the facility, even with insulation and heat tracing, it's not enough. So you can sometimes put wind guards there to make sure that the wind chill is not too much in that area. I think it's also really tricky in the winter. In the summer, we're quite aware of the heat stress, but in the winter, we're working outside for potentially long periods, and we can be exposed to very cold temperatures without realizing, because you're getting involved in the task, you don't realize how cold you're getting. So keeping an eye also on yourself, so that the task that you're doing, whatever that is, you can complete that safely. I know that I spoke to Jill earlier, she hasn't joined yet, but she mentioned that there are quite a few things associated with secondary containment around winter time. So in the UK, you may have seen increased rain recently, and a lot of bunds have overflowed because people haven't opened the drains to empty the rainwater. But that also means that if you did have a loss of containment at that time, you wouldn't have had any capacity for the loss of containment from the tank, and that would have gone directly over the bund. I've also seen a lot of times in this sort of weather, because it rains a lot, the bund drain valves are left open, and so if there is a loss of containment, again, that loss of containment goes directly to the place you don't want it, because the drain valve is open. Have you seen that, George, where people are trying to do their best to manage the environmental situation, but then land up making things worse if something goes wrong?
Yeah, I think again it gets to the ability to consciously understand what it is that we're doing. And my one personal practice that I kind of learned early on in my career is asking myself, what we do now in hazards reviews. So is the what if, a simple task of opening a valve to allow water to drain from the dike. It's very, doesn't take much. But then as I walked away, leaving the water running, I asked myself the question that you just raised. What if, that valve is left open and we do have the need for that containment to take place because there is a failure either in the piping or in the tank or vessel that is being covered by secondary containment. And so, and then the other aspect is the personal protection and making sure that you don't experience frostbite and some of the other injuries that can take place to us under very cold conditions. And unfortunately, by the time we find out that we may have a problem, it's usually too late. The impact on our skin is something that is delayed. The reaction or the sensitivity is delayed, and so again, you need to take frequent breaks from the job. Make sure you go to a control room or whatever building might be nearby to kind of warm up, and rather than being out there in the cold weather for hours upon hours. And I've never worked on a platform, but I could imagine there it's even more dangerous because of the winds and just the environment is much more severe.
Yeah, I remember we were offshore on a bad storm, and they told me don't go outside around the corners unless you have stones in your pocket because you'll get flown away. But yeah, we needed to wear the helmet straps, watch where we were going, and make sure we didn't use the outside walkways when the weather was really bad. So yeah, it's a lot to think about, especially if you're a lot of there's a big age gap in the UK. So there's a large number of people who are getting close to retirement, and then there's a large number of people who are just entering the industry. But there's a gap between the two because of oil price crashes, etc. That they've lost those middle people. Just rather keep the older people who knew what was going on. And then now that we need to add more people, they're adding people of the younger generation. But that's leaving like a skills gap. And when you're starting to think about complex situations like dealing with unexpected scenarios in cold weather, offshore platform, you start to realize how much competence you require in those people. And if you then all of a sudden got a load of people stepping off, and the people stepping up have not yet had that exchange, we can find ourselves in a bit of a tricky situation, which I think some assets are getting close to at the moment.
Yeah, we have the same situation in the United States.
Yeah.
The manufacturing operational function in the United States are very challenged today in trying to get the expertise and the competencies that they need to run these hazardous operations in a safe manner. Yeah.
Jakub shared in the chat that in Algeria they have a problem with high ambient temperature. I remember when I was working in Iraq, we had the problem of high ambient temperature, but it was coupled with very heavy rain. So if we had the nice lagging to keep everything process heat conservation, we had a very heavy rain, and then the next day was very warm temperature. So had nice wet lagging against pipe work, nice and covered, so we didn't see what was going on. Really big corrosion and insulation threat there. And it didn't stay cold for very long in Iraq. So all of that, when during the day, the temperature very quickly rose to nice corrosion conditions. Another thing, Georgia, I've seen happen a fair few times on LinkedIn, and again, it might just be because of the visual impact of the tank moving, but it's welding incidents were in tanks which either were assumed to have no hazard, and I think you shared one which was a water tank, or a tank which is assumed to be empty, They knew it had a hazardous vapor or liquid in it before, but they've emptied it, and then some maintenance work has commenced on it, presumably hot work, which has then ignited a flammable atmosphere inside. Do you have any insights as to why we're seeing so many of these incidents, and how can we stop them? Because they seem relatively straightforward: flammable atmosphere, spark potential, and the ignition.
Yeah, if you look at some of the studies that have been performed and some of the incident investigations, unfortunately, we only get to see at least very few of them. The Chemical Safety Board and sometimes OSHA may have a little blurb on an incident where they're fining a company for violating some regulation. I believe it boils down to that old favorite word of mine is culture. It's a question of how sensitive is the organization and how well is the leadership or management of that organization addressing culture, establishing the expectations, doing the appropriate training, taking the appropriate action when shortcuts are made by their folks who are doing, in your case, you're talking about the welding operation. In most cases, either the person did not follow the procedure because they were not aware of it, they were not trained properly. And that sometimes comes into play when you bring in contractors to do these type of jobs. And if you would look at some of the data, I don't have anything that is statistically valid, but you mentioned the water tank in California, that work was being performed by a contractor. Some of the other ones that I've read about that have happened this year in India and other places, also, there were contractors involved. And what happens then are two issues. One is, at least we took the responsibility in the element of contractor safety to ensure that the contractor beforehand knew what they were dealing with and knew what they had to do to ensure that this specific job could be performed properly, and their workers could go home at the end of the job in the same manner they came in without getting hurt. And unfortunately, again, is people making the assumptions and taking shortcuts. What we call, again, unfortunately, the human factors is a piece of this, but also management, in my opinion, humble opinion, management is not doing their job in ensuring that all of these functions are being done properly. Because, I mean, in the United States, we have OSHA laws and regulations that require that. So it's not something that is left up to you. You've got to do it. And we're just failing in these catastrophic events to do it properly.
Yeah, I mean, we in the UK, we were required by law to consider the risks and adequately mitigate them. But we had an incident in 2016 of this nature, and then another one in December 2019. So they still happen, despite us having these strong regulations with the threat of legal action, large fines, potentially prohibition notices where we will not be able to operate. But still these things happen. I think what you said at the beginning is really relevant. We always have a lot of challenges associated with operations pressure, corporate pressure to try and implement the next thing which is on the corporate agenda. We also then have our own pressures from home as well. And to try and think of all these things, plus actively manage process safety, you really need to have sufficient knowledge within your team, but also sufficient competence to know the hazards, know what prevents them, what mitigates them, and then making sure that those are healthy at all times, and if they're not healthy, what mitigations have been put in place instead. I think it's a lot of people underestimate the diligence and dedication required for good process safety management at all phases.
The other thing which we found, at least internally within our sites, and we're talking about chemical operations that dealing with hazardous materials, high temperatures, high pressure, etc., is the auditing process. We found it to be very beneficial to go out in the field and not only audit our operations, but also work with our contractors as partners and look at their jobs, look at what we're doing, and in that process, in a positive manner, also build their competence by having one-on-one discussions or 1-on-3 discussions or whatever. If we found some potential situation that was not being addressed properly, stop the job, explain to them why we're doing it, and kind of engage them in an improvement process to ensure that they themselves are not going to be hurt at that point in time, but also in a way build their expertise. So as they go on to other jobs, they have that experience, because in many cases, I don't know how it is in the UK, but in many cases, the contractors, the welders and the pipe fitters and so on, their training in what we call process safety management is minimal. It's basically non-existent. So in many cases, they know how to do their job, but to do it safely in the particular environment that they're involved is something that, at least within DuPont, we made a great effort to train them, to allow them to be knowledgeable of what it is that they were dealing with, really to protect themselves.
Yeah, in the UK, when you work offshore, you have to do something called MIS training, which is mandatory industry safety training. That was when I last went offshore. It's a 5-day training, and that covers some elements of process safety. When you get offshore onto the rig, you're given an induction by the OIM, the offshore installation manager, and they will mention high hazard tasks which are happening on the facility, which might be actually the reason that you're there, because maybe you're being flown on as a contractor to do some high hazard work, or it might be something that you're not involved in, but to be aware of. But I agree that people move a lot from site to site, and to be able to have that knowledge of the process safety hazards associated with that site where you're working on it's tricky. Another thing that you mentioned is the audit. And I think that's a really, really important part of it. I really enjoyed that part of working on site, going around and talking to people. But I also watched a really good video this month, which was posted by someone on LinkedIn, about the Piper Alpha incident. And I hadn't watched that before, but it was recorded on the BBC. I'll pop a link on LinkedIn this week. But he spoke about the permit to work system. And he said, okay, well, when we started to look into permit to work and how it had failed during Piper Alpha, it was really easy. We knew we could find the problem. Within 2 weeks of starting the investigation, we knew that the permit to work system was a major contributory factor. And he said, if we could find it, not knowing anything about oil and gas, because he was from a chemicals background, and also with the platform in the bottom of the sea, if we could find it within 2 weeks, why didn't the management know that there was such a big problem with permit to work at Piper Alpha? Well, they did have audits, but the audits never brought in any problems. They had the self-audit by the operators to go and check the permit system, make sure it was good, but they were always, top quality, no problems identified. And they even had independent audits, and they didn't identify any significant issues with the permit to work. So even though there was a known issue and everybody on the facility knew there was this issue, it wasn't reported back. And a lot of the times, people in the organization are trying to give good news up to management. But actually, if you don't know that there's a problem, there's nothing that you can do about it. Another thing he said was that the offshore installation manager went around for a walk on the facility every night at 7 o'clock when he finished work. So he could go and see what was happening on site, etc., which was really great to go and spend an hour on site, but he did it when all the work parties had finished. And so as a result, he was never able to see those failings in the permit to work system himself, because he never saw parties at work. And if he did see them at work, it was only a very small number who were then on the night shift. So that was really interesting, not only having that audit, but thinking about the time of day you do the audit, who you're doing the audit on, and making sure that as a manager, you're happy to receive bad news. Because if you're not, you're only going to get good news coming back up, which can be
Let me
tricky.
add, when I say audit or assessment, whatever is the right terminology, it has to be interactive. We found that, I mean, if you're just looking at physical things, you diminish the value of the audit. If you engage the personnel that happen to come across in your audit path and talk to them, ask them, how do you feel about the job? Is there anything here that concerns you, etc.? Then they become part of that process. And then many times they bring up some good either ideas how to make improvements, or some issues that need to be addressed that haven't been addressed. And then they become, those items become action items that coming out of the audit. So I have to admit, when I first started auditing, it was a very passive process. I was just really looking at things out of place, so to speak. But through that learning process, the engagement with the personnel is really more critical than anything else, because it allows them to understand that you care about them, and allows them to see that if they have issues, that you address them and you solve them. And so that's the other piece I would say. It has to be interactive to make full use of that time that you're out in the field.
Yeah, I think a lot of managers make the mistake to think that to be able to talk about process safety, they have to be process safety experts. So they feel quite comfortable talking about holding the handrails, slip, trips and falls, because they feel quite competent in that area, because that's something that they can identify and assess. But as you said, the audit doesn't have to be, everything and look and find everything out of place. It could actually be people, through the conversation with you, identifying something which is out of place, which they didn't maybe see before because they were so engrossed in their task, or that they've known for a long time but didn't feel confident to say. And so the process safety talks, if you just can choose a topic and just start to have those open questions, what do you guys think here? How do you think this could impact? Getting them to come up with the answers. You don't have to have the answers, but just listening with that open, objective mind. You haven't got to that management position not being able to understand complex situations, but just going and asking those open questions, letting them lead you, really, really helps. I've got a message in the chat to say that there's been an incident in a heater, and operators made many attempts to start with condensate inside, and then there was accumulation of condensate vapor, which caused an explosion. I've seen quite a number of boiler incidents, and I think you posted a particularly bad one in India recently. There were 4 or 5 fatalities. Yeah, it's difficult with boiler incidents to know whether it's the steam explosion or to know whether it's the flammable fluids exploding. But both of them can cause really significant consequences with flying debris, burns, mainly flying debris, I think, because of the significant overpressure that you can see.
Yeah, I usually consider a lot of equipment, but boilers, I usually call them weapons of destruction too, bombs, because as you said, on both sides of the operation, either on the fuel side or on the process side, if everything is not up to snuff, you can have some real serious problems. And this is one of the unit operations that from a proactive point of view, I have found that you've got to be sure that all of your alarms, interlocks, your control, all the control system that you have in place are being properly monitored and follow NFPA or whatever standard or you're following in the particular country you're in. Because if you don't, sooner or later, there is going to be a potential event, and then luck is the thing that separates it from a catastrophe impacting people or just equipment. But those things, like in our processes, the interlocks and all the other safety-related instrumentation, they've got to be up to date, functioning properly at a high level of confidence.
Yeah, that's right. And I know that at least in the UK, there are a lot of legacy boilers operating and the instrumentation hasn't been upgraded to what would be the normal if you installed it now. And it's understandable. You've got an old system. Why should you upgrade? But if you really start to think about the safety, you know, there are some things that need to be upgraded and some things which are optional extras, and really defining the difference between those two is critical to keeping your operations safe, even in the long-term running of something. If there's been a major incident, you can learn from it. You should try your best to. Another boiler or heater thing that comes up quite a lot is, I think it's ethylene, is it? Yeah, I think it's ethylene, where they're passing it through the heater, so the fire's on the outside and the fluid's on the inside. I think it's a
Correct.
reboiler at the bottom of a column or something. Yeah,
Right.
and then it cokes up. And then there's been a lot of failures, and I'm not sure if the failures are due to you know, hot spots and then causing deformation in the tubes. But I've also seen incidents where they were trying to do a repair, so they weren't able to soak the coke off before they then repaired the tubes. They then had to cut the tubes, but because there was so much coke, it made a lot of dust and then caused an explosion in the boiler. Do you have experience with that, with more chemicals background? Because I haven't seen that personally. I've just heard about a lot of those incidents.
No, on that one, I'm like you. I've read about those events, related events taking place, but I really haven't been in operations where we were, at least the operations that I ran or was involved in, where we were involved to this potential aspect. The other thing that I would add is, you know, the training, the knowledge, going back to the boiler situation that the chairman brought up, is, you know, did the person who was running this particular heater that was mentioned, did they recognize that there was a potential problem in the making, and did they take, or were trained, or were they capable of proactively then stopping the operation to prevent the explosion from taking place? Because that's the other aspect, is in the final analysis, the person in the field or the person in the control room board or whatever, the person controlling the process, they have sort of the what I'll call the final ability for human intervention. And this is where, you know, competence and expertise comes into play, the training comes into play, doing maybe tabletops or doing other type of training in the field where you simulate particular scenarios and not verbally, and then see and ask the person what would he or she do under these circumstances. And in that way, kind of build their knowledge and their competence to understand that that they can potentially prevent some of these situations from taking place. Now, that also means that you have to have an organization that empowers their employees to stop an operation if the employee feels that something is going to go wrong, and the employee doesn't have to go back and ask management's permission, et cetera, because in that wasted time, the event may take place. So that's the other piece too, is sort of the culture within the organization as to where you, and we here in the United States, speaking for myself, we have gone from, when I started in '69 to where we are today. Everything in '69, everything was controlled by management and supervision. You had to ask for their permission. Now we have learned over the last several decades that you've got to empower the people, because otherwise, if they don't feel and can do what needs to be done, then this whole process has no value. So that's the other little piece I wanted to add.
Yeah, that trying to micromanage and make sure that you're in charge of everything, it doesn't work in high hazard industries, because people have to make quick decisions based on the information that's coming to them, which doesn't necessarily allow you the time to go to management again. I know that was one of the issues with Piper. So Piper could have survived the initial explosion, which killed 1 to 2 people. But unfortunately, the adjacent platforms were continuing to feed them with high pressure gas. And but they couldn't get hold of their management, because the management were not around on, I think it was Saturday evening. So they couldn't get hold of them, so they couldn't make a decision to stop production until things really were very, very bad. It was a bit late to stop it. Yeah, what I'm going to do, George, is I'm just going to ask anybody if anybody has any questions or anything that they want to share. If not, I'm going to wrap up, and I'm going to share what's happening, what's coming up, and then we'll wrap up for this month. And thank you very much for being an impromptu participant in the whole session.
My pleasure.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments they want to add before we go? Oh, so we have another one. So there's an issue with passing ESDVs, which result in extended blowdown time. The emergency shutdown valves are welded in the pipeline, and we have no means to repair unless we cut out a pipeline. Please provide for expert can provide a solution. So I've seen this problem a lot, where you need, you install a valve that you need to be tight shut off, but number one, you don't install any means to test it. So you can't verify that it's tight shut off, even though that's a functional requirement. And then the second one is that you don't have a look at the isolation required to complete the maintenance. If you find it's not tight shut off, or how do you even do a maintenance? We had one of these when I was working offshore. It was the last isolation valve before the riser. And so therefore it wouldn't even have been feasible to put in maintenance isolations either side, because that's not that wouldn't have been the right thing anyway. So even if they had identified they needed to do maintenance on this, they wouldn't have done it. But they did have facilities for testing of leakage.
Excuse me, I'm going to have to leave. I've got somebody else who came here to do some work in my yard. So thanks, everybody, and have a...
Thanks, George.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks very much. Bye. So what we did there was we launched a pig, and launched the pig past the ESDV with then a double block and bleed seal on the pig. So put the sealing in, and then once that was sealed and we proved that was sealed, they could then work on the valve, and lifting the internals out, changing the seat, and then putting them back in. Or if welding was required, they could also do that because it had the required seal. If you want to get in touch about that, let me know. But it depends, again, if you have the ability to launch a pig down past that ESDV where you're trying to do the thing. The other thing you can do is assess which valves actually need to be tight shut off. Obviously, you're having some problems with your blowdown time. Having a look if there are other valves that you could repurpose as secondary shut off rather than these ESDVs. You can then close those manually, say after you initiate the ESDV, so that you can improve your blood time. But if you get in touch offline, we can discuss that. The last thing to do is to discuss what's coming up next. I'll share the screen again. So this month, quite a lot's happening. I haven't been able to put it all on a slide. So we've got the ICME training, the LOPA training. I think there's still a few places left if you haven't booked onto that session. I'm doing an in-house process risk assessment training. If you haven't seen that training by the ICME, it's really good, gives you an overall of all the different types of process risk assessment. The next session here is going to be on the 8th of December, and the time will be confirmed. So just keep a watch out on LinkedIn. And then if you want any free resources, have a look at the website. There's a few templates on HAZOP and LOPA. I just want to say thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and have a wonderful evening. And we'll see you again next month when you have more questions. Okay, take care. Thank you.